Good day all. Pleasure to be back. Hope everyone is okay. What we're going to do today is give people a refresher for, I think, one of the key components for why people believe, and more often now, that Christianity started with a celestial Christ. There are many reasons for believing this, and now it's becoming more and more evident that the earliest Christians were not the Christians that espoused what was written in the canonical Gospels. The epistle writers seem to be betraying that their Jesus is a much more celestial deity, one that never really arrived on earth at all. And I'm going to prove that hopefully in the next 10 minutes, just so, well, not prove it, but give everyone an outline for why this is actually quite credible. The lack of evidence for the gospel Jesus in the earliest testimonies of the epistle writers, and the fact that you can back engineer a Jesus straight out of the Old Testament, the apocryphal works, and the fact that the early Christians, even the canonical kind of Christians like Clement, never attest to a flesh and blood really gospel Jesus, and can only quote Jesus when the quotes are actually from the Old Testament, kind of betrays this. This is a feature of these early documents, not a bug. We've also talked about the idea that Jesus will be coming, he will be revealed, and so on, not will come again, and so on. So I've got so much to go through in the next few weeks. I hope you can all stick with this. So we're going to look at St. Paul's idea, this notion of St. Paul and his Jesus, basically. And remember, in Galatians he says, I get my Jesus from all the scriptures, and he can only really mean the Old Testament scriptures here. There is nothing else. And also Revelation. That's it. And he's very clear on this. And he doesn't know anything about the gospel miracles, the parables, Jesus' family, like none of that exists in Paul. And it's not merely incidental. There are, 7 authentic letters, 4, 7, 10, and then the canonical 14 with Hebrews and the pastorals as well. That comes to us only through Ignatius at 180 about CE. So let's see what Jesus is really like when we read Paul. So I'm going to just quote David Fitzgerald in a wonderful book on the subject of Christian origins. He's talking about Paul here, and he's quite a... Anyway, we're going to just quote him. Through Jesus, all things, and through whom we exist. That's, again, so through all things and through whom we exist. Kind of lofty idea of Christ. That's 1 Thessalonians 8:6. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. Colossians 1:15. In him dwells the fullness of the Godhead bodily. Colossians 2:9. Right? Big lofty ideas here. All things in heaven and earth, visible and invisible, were created by him, through him, and for him. Colossians 1:16. He is before all things, and by him all things consist. Colossians 1:17. He is at the right hand of God, and indeed intercedes for us. Romans 8:34. He will judge the secret thoughts of all. Romans 1:6. Having been raised from the dead, he will never die again. Death no longer has dominion over him. Romans 6:9. The law of the Spirit of life in him has set you free from the law of sin and of death. Romans 8:2. In the end of the law, he is the end of the law, and that so that there may be righteousness for everybody who believes. Romans 10:4. He was the rock in the desert that Moses spoke to, struck with his staff so miraculously get water. That's Moses here. So he's a rock Jesus is the rock in the desert in Moses' time. That's 1 Corinthians 10:4. Our bodies are the members of Christ. 1 Thessalonians 6:15. We belong to Christ and Christ belongs to God. 1 Thessalonians 3:23. We were washed, we were sanctified, we were justified in his name. 1 Thessalonians 6:11. He is coming with all his saints, 1 Thessalonians 3:13 and 5:23, from heaven, and will transform the body of our humiliation, that it may be conformed to the body of his glory by the power and also that also enables him to make all things subject to him. Philippians 3:20-21. This is from Fitzgerald's book, Jesus Mything in Action, and it's page 103, volume 2, page 103 and 104. So we get this notion here that Jesus is really huge, celestial, right hand of God, exactly what Philo says about the Logos, and Jesus is the Logos, and we find this this very real idea in Zechariah and so on, of this almighty one of God, the firstborn, the very image of God, God's agent of creation in Jewish texts, before the canonical Gospels came along. So we can now patchwork the notion of Jesus here as an Old Testament kind of deity who's also paralleled in the story of Moses and in the story of Joshua and in the story of Elisha and Elisha as well, and in Joseph as well. So you don't need a historical Jesus to write Jesus' story. And when you attach the Titus elements here, and when you also look at Jesus ben Ananias and his death, Judas the Galilean and his death, and there might well be a connection between Judas and a Jesus that came along in the first century. All of this will be explained, and I mean there is evidence for this. We can now actually begin to look and assess where Jesus' story actually came from. It is not difficult. Now I'm going to read to you here in Ignatius, 140 is about here, isn't it? I'm going to read to you what Ignatius is now saying about 100 years plus after. And it's very interesting indeed, because you're going to be seeing here the beginnings of the historicizing, I think, with Ignatius, with a few others, obviously, as well. And we're going to begin to see what these guys were saying to try and make Jesus real, like flesh and blood, not just celestial, but down here now as a mundane human on earth. And it's really interesting. And there's a bit of talk about Jesus is, we'll just talk now. This is from Richie Carrier in Historicity of Jesus, in the Historicity of Jesus, one of his seminal books on this subject. You can find his work really easily online. He's been in tons of debates, loads of discussions on the subject. Very interesting book indeed, and really scholarly work, I've got to say as well. Peer-reviewed scholarship. He ain't messing around, people. Okay, now, so I'm quoting him now. How did the creed change so radically into such a conspicuous assertion of historicism in just 60 years? That's as weird on historicity as it is on mythicism. Note what changed. Paul said Jesus came into being from David's sperm. Ignatius now insists we have to say Jesus came from the descendants of David, conspicuously precisely the thing Paul never says. Paul said Jesus came into being from a woman, and his surrounding argument implies that by this he meant from the woman Hagar, an allegory. Ignatius now insists we must say Jesus came from an actual woman named Mary, not so generic women in an argument about not some generic women in an argument about allegorical women. Notably, Paul never mentions a Mary, not in any creed he attests. So why is her name now important to affirm in the creed? When did this happen and why? Now, very quickly, this mention in Galatians 4:4 of being born of a woman is couched in allegory all the way through. And I've got a few pages on this in my book, and I will go through this with you way before Christmas, I hope. So we're going to be able to see exactly what was going on there. And actually, there's another argument to dispute this claim, and that is that Tertullian, when he's arguing against, I think it might be contra someone, he actually doesn't see that line in Galatians 4:4. It appears to evade him. Why? It's actually really important for him in that argument he has, but it's not there. So it doesn't matter which way you look at this. The allegory, everything in that chapter is allegory. He goes through these steps and beautiful allegorical poetry about Jesus. If it's allegory and he doesn't seem to know much else, you can argue that he is talking about in a kind of poetic way and not really referring to a born of an actual human mother. In both places, Paul said Jesus was made genomai, not born genau, by choosing the same word Paul uses to signal divine manufacture of Adam and our future resurrection bodies, and never of human birth. In conspicuous contrast to the word Paul does always use of human birth, Ignatius conspicuously reverses the vocabulary and insists we now must say born genau and not made genomai. Exactly the same way we know Christian scribes tried doctoring the manuscripts of Paul in both Romans 1:3 and Galatians 4:4 at the same time, thus proving they were well aware of the problem I'm pointing out, Richard's pointing out. Hence, though both words can mean birth, Christians were aware Paul's usage uncomfortably did not. So 2 words for born, one more manufacture, one more made. And Paul always uses that when he's talking about Jesus, and he never uses the word for actually being born, or humanly born, which he does use many times in his letters. Paul said Jesus ate and drank in a vision, 1 Corinthians 11:23. Ignatius now insists we must say Jesus ate and drank for real. Why is that important? How did that get into the creed? And why? Again, I've been through this. The Last Supper, or the Lord's Supper in Paul, doesn't refer to anyone being there in Paul's rendition of the recounting, of the supper. He's just talking to Paul in ecstatic vision. Paul said the archons of this aeon crucified Jesus, 1 Corinthians 2:8, language evocative of celestial demonic powers, while essentially saying the Roman authorities never would have done that, Romans 13. Ignatius now insists we must say Pontius Pilate crucified Jesus and shun anyone who says otherwise as an agent of the devil. So why was saying otherwise? So who was saying otherwise? Indeed, why did the name of the crucifier become important to the creed? And why does that only happen well after the Gospels chose to place Pilate into the story? Paul essentially says there were no earthly witnesses to Jesus before his resurrection. 1 Corinthians 15:3-8, Romans 10:14-16, Romans 16:25 and 26. Ignatius now says we must say there were. Why did that become necessary? Why did that enter the creed? How did other Christians this new maneuver was designed to exclude have to say about it? Richard carried Jesus from outer space. This is his smaller version of this bigger book, The Historicity of Jesus. Page 135, 136. So we now have Ignatius saying you must. So he's saying here in Tertullian's chapter 9, Ignatius of Antioch, when anyone speaks to you without Jesus, who was descended from David, who was from Mary, who really was born and ate and drank and really was persecuted under Pontius Pilate and really was crucified and died as seen by those in heaven and on earth and under the earth, he was also truly raised from the dead. So we get these really points now. He's trying to force this notion. Remember, Christians at an early point were saying Christ never existed on earth, guys, and we know that through Ignatius. And others. He also states that real Christians really are fully persuaded when it comes to our Lord, and he really was descended from David according to the flesh, and the Son of God according to the will and power of God, and he really was born of a virgin and baptized by John in order that all righteousness must be fulfilled by him, and that he really was nailed up under Pontius Pilate and Herod the Tetrarch on our behalf in the flesh. Well, actually, this guy seems to be propagandizing, and if it's true that Ignatius, they needed someone, the church needed someone who had been martyred and so on, and they write these epistles after the fact, and it does seem that that might be the case now. And certainly there were 7 epistles. 4 of them are most likely fake. 3 of them are probably 2 of them are probably fake, and 1 of them might be some kind of real document. It's a mess. Ignatius, looking at Ignatius as reality in this. So yeah, I mean, that's basically what I just wanted to juxtapose Paul's writings with what comes after in Ignatius. And again, Ignatius isn't really attested or written about until quite a long way from the point where he was supposed to have been around in about 110. He's not really attested properly until the latter half of the 2nd century, and there are many people who were trying to forge writings on these guys, and were making stories that were fairly patently openly mythological. Ignatius's death, Ignatius's story, again, I think I've been through this, and you can check this out in some of my other videos. Yeah, it's not really very credible. So what we've seen, what have we been through? Well, I think that's about right. I think that's all I want to say here. Paul comes from a strata within Christianity, and even letters not by him actually attest to the same thing. So I mentioned Colossians there, Thessalonians. There's a moment in Thessalonians, 1 Thessalonians 2, 15, 16, where he appears to be talking about they put him to death on the planet Earth, and the Jews are responsible and blah blah. It's most likely a forgery, an interpolation put in after the fact. Scholarship, abundant scholarship exists that now rests on that assumption fairly firmly. So we're going to leave that there. Don't want this to be more than 20 minutes. Please, and I'm also going to be redoing these videos in a much smarter, scripted way with some really nice visuals going forward. This is only a channel that's just really getting going now, so I want this to be interesting for you all, and this is just a simple way that I can get information out quickly. I hope you enjoy this. Please check some of my other videos, like and subscribe if you enjoy this material. Peace and love. See you later.